Let me tell you something quietly tragic and strangely beautiful about disappearing. It's not always an accident. Sometimes, it's an act of survival. We all know someone who's vanished from our lives, a friend who stopped replying, a loved one who faded from every conversation, someone who was once everywhere and then, suddenly, nowhere. And maybe, at some point, you've been that person too. But here's the thing no one talks about. Disappearing isn't always about distance. It's about disconnection from noise, from pressure, from versions of yourself that no longer fit. In the digital age, presence has become proof of existence. We measure aliveness in updates, stories, timestamps. To vanish feels unnatural, like erasing yourself from a world that demands constant proof you're still here. But psychology tells a different story. Sometimes, disappearing isn't avoidance, it's restoration. There's a concept called social withdrawal as self-regulation. It happens when the mind becomes overstimulated by noise, by conflict, by too much connection. When every message feels like an obligation and every notification feels like an intrusion, the brain quietly whispers, enough. So some people stop replying. They stop explaining. They stop performing. Not because they don't care, but because they're trying to breathe again. We often see disappearance as rejection, but often it's protection or retreat to rebuild peace, clarity, and boundaries. In a world obsessed with visibility, disappearing becomes the last form of control. When everything about you is public, choosing to vanish is rebellion. It's saying, asterisk, I decide who gets access to me. I decide when I return. Asterisk, psychologists talk about attachment fatigue, the exhaustion of always holding space for others while neglecting yourself. Eventually, you reach a quiet breaking point. You stop showing up. You stop explaining your silence. You disappear not out of cruelty, but depletion. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone is to step away. But here's the paradox. Disappearing doesn't always mean you stop caring. Sometimes it means you care too much but have no more energy to express it. You love in silence, from a distance. You watch their stories but never react. You type messages, then delete them. You exist on the edges, unseen but still connected by invisible threads. That's the psychology of emotional disappearance: absence on the surface, presence underneath. Often, people who disappear aren't running from others, they're running toward themselves. You outgrow friendships built on older versions of who you were. You evolve, but they remember the old you. So, you vanish not out of hate, but because you can't keep shrinking to stay familiar. This is identity realignment, the painful shedding of social roles that no longer fit your truth. And yet, disappearance carries grief. Because you're not just leaving people, you're leaving memories, habits, places that once felt like home. You scroll through old photos and realize you've become a ghost in your own story. There's an ache in that. But growth always requires disappearance. You cannot transform while staying visible to every expectation. Our world bombards us with input comparison, communication, performance. Our brains were never built for constant visibility. So, some people isolate to recover cognitive quiet, to detox from noise. To others, it looks like withdrawal. To psychologists, it's healing. But not all disappearances are peaceful. Some are born from pain, heartbreak, trauma, fear. Sometimes, people vanish because they don't know how to say, I'm not okay. So, silence becomes their language. They retreat because being unseen feels safer than being misunderstood. That kind of disappearance isn't chosen, it's learned. And healing from it takes time, safety, and someone patient enough to wait for your return. Yet, even in pain, disappearance can be sacred. It's the cocoon stage of transformation. From the outside, it looks like stillness, nothing happening. But inside, everything is changing. Psychologists call it intrapersonal processing, the private construction of new identity. People disappear not to escape life, but to reimagine how they want to live it. Maybe that's what we misunderstand most. Disappearance isn't the end of connection. It's the pause between chapters, the breath before becoming. In Japanese culture, there's a word, asterisk ma times the space between things that gives them meaning. Disappearing is times ma times for the soul, a sacred pause that allows new understanding to emerge. When someone disappears from your life, it leaves questions that echo, was it me? Did I do something wrong? Why didn't they say goodbye? The truth is, closure rarely comes from others. It comes from compassion, from realizing some disappearances aren't about you. They're about what the other person needed to survive. And maybe one day they'll reappear, changed, quieter, more themselves. Until then, let them go with kindness. Because the psychology of disappearing isn't about abandonment, it's about evolution. It's the instinct to step away from noise, to return to essence. So, if you ever find yourself fading, don't feel guilty. You're not vanishing, you're reorganizing. You're reclaiming your energy from places it no longer belongs. And maybe that's what disappearing really is. Not an ending, but a quiet beginning. A return to yourself, unseen, unhurried, unapologetically whole.